our voices are just as powerful as the people we put in power. And people have to stop saying that, weren't you scared? Asking, weren't you scared? It's too late for us to be scared. We have already wasted a lot of time. What we should be really, really afraid of is these atrocities, these human rights violations continuing. What I think I would say is shift your fear, like shift the source of your fear. You can be afraid of more children dying and starving to death, or you can be afraid of your politicians. It's shift your fear.
Hello, I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. Welcome to Bubble Pop, the show where we talk about some of the biggest headlines and juiciest news tidbits so you don't have to doom scroll. I am really excited about today's guest. For those of you who have followed my work for a while, you have already seen me report on her badass behavior. Kagiso Lesego Molope is an award-winning Indigenous novelist and playwright from South Africa who currently lives in Canada. She is an incredibly talented, accomplished writer. But on May 7th of last year, she made headlines for another reason: her bravery and the cowardice she encountered as a result. See, Kagiso stepped on stage at the Politics and the Pen Gala, a glitsy annual fundraiser attended by some of the most powerful people in Canada. And she reminded this room full of people with the power to do something about it that children are dying of malnutrition in Gaza. At the time she spoke, 1 in 3 children in northern Gaza under 2 years of age were suffering from acute malnutrition. It's horrifying to see that things haven't improved, and if anything, are more dire now, a year later, because Israel has been blocking humanitarian aid from entering Gaza. As Kagiso bravely delivered her unscheduled remarks, she asked this room full of powerful people an incredibly important question. Take a listen.
A time is coming when the world will start to apologize for what is happening, and when that time comes, we will be asked. We are the people the world is going to look to and ask, what did you do with your power?
In response, she was heckled, including by a committee member for the event at the time, booed, and ultimately, after she returned to her seat, she was kicked out of the event. We need more people like Kagiso in these powerful rooms, and way fewer of the kinds of people who kicked her out. Her bravery, her compassion, and her lived experience are just some of the reasons I am so excited to have her on the show today. Kagiso, welcome to Bubble Pop.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
I'm so excited to have you here. So we first met when you had been kicked out of an event because you had the audacity to remind people with the power to do something about it, that children are starving in Gaza. Mm-hmm. It's been a year since that happened. How do you feel about that day now, looking back on it?
I wish that I had said more. I feel mostly that if given the chance, I would say it again and again and again. I was scared when I got kicked out because you just had these like big burly men surrounding you and telling you what to do, where to go. They wouldn't let me go out one exit or the other. It was just really scary. So that part, I have to say, like, I still look back on that and feel like chills, like, oh my God, I can't believe that happened. And also the co-organizer of the event was like really, really mad at me and came out to like, tell me like, you just stood right next to me, you didn't say anything. He was livid. And then he told security, like, get her out of here, hurry her up. And then of course you and I know he later went on to claim that he didn't know anything about me being kicked out, even though he had
of course
really kicked me out. But so I think about stuff like that, and I think, I'm somebody who really wants to feel like, as an artist, you want to feel like you are being always aware of what's happening, always participating in the actions that are needed for your time, right? And I'm so glad that I said that, but I feel as well like, yeah, I feel chills like, oh my God, I actually got kicked out. Like that was so scary. But overall,
Yeah,
I feel good about what I said. I
you
didn't,
should.
yeah. Yeah, overall, I feel people keep saying to me, "Oh, you were so brave. Like, weren't you scared?" And I'm like, no, we were already out of time. We were
Yeah.
7 months into the genocide. We were already out of time. The only thing I had to be scared of was that the famine was going to continue, was that the killings were going to continue. Like that's what I was scared of. I wasn't scared of the people in the room. It's just like was like it wasn't even interesting to me who exactly was in the room, you know.
Yeah.
I later found out that like um some I think Mark somebody told me that Mark Carney might have been in the room. I don't know.
Oh,
People
it
who
wouldn't surprise me. Yeah.
Yeah, because the person said, I think, the next leader of the Liberal Party was in the room. And but I didn't think about that. All I was thinking was, yo, kids are dying of malnutrition. We're sitting here. I felt more and more agitated as like, because you arrived
Yeah.
like an hour before. I felt angrier and angrier, just like walking around and seeing the food and seeing that
Yes.
everyone's so jolly and networking, and I thought 7 months into this. And
Yeah.
so when I went up, I thought, I'm going to talk about it, and then I'm going to get off stage and people are going to say, I'm going to sit at my table, and we're going to start talking. Like people are going to talk,
Yeah.
and it's going to bring it into the room, bring the moment into the room. Yeah, that's not what happened. Obviously. Yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel when like the first boos and heckles started hitting? Like, how did you feel in that moment when that was the response from these people who were having these, like, in this expensive room with these fancy meals,
Yeah,
who were booing you talking about malnutrition in
and
Gaza?
mad drunk. Like they were drunk out of their minds. A lot.
Really? Oh my God. That's just so,
Yeah, they were crazy drunk. One reporter told me after he investigated, he was like, well, he was actually in the room and he was like, oh my God, so many of them were just crazy drunk. Because people do that. They go to this event and they get crazy drunk before the event starts. There's a lot of food there, a lot of booze.
yeah.
When the booze came, I felt like myself. I felt like I'm a township chick. Like I can handle a few boos. I can handle this. I've lived through so much worse than people booing me. And so I think there was that part of me, that like South African like freedom fighter parents part of me was coming out. The more they booed, the more I was like, I actually have something to say, and I'm not leaving until I say something. So I
Awesome.
didn't feel worried at all. I just felt like I was meeting them like face to face.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I started to ask you this before we started recording, and I was like, oh my God, I need to ask you this for the actual like podcast. But did you go in, because you worded so much of this like perfectly, like asking that integral question, like what did you do with your power? You will be asked that.
Yeah.
That was incredible. Like it's just so obvious you're a writer. But I wanted to ask you, like, did you plan that, or like how much of that did you just come up with on the spot?
Yeah, I actually, when I got the email inviting me to the event, I thought, what I'm going to do is I'm going to refuse the invitation. I'm going to write them an email and say, thank you for inviting me, but I am not going to come because of who is hosting the event. But also, I'm surprised that we're having this event in the middle of a genocide. And then I thought, I had a friend who kept saying to me, you should come. And I was like, I don't think I'm going to go. And she was like, come, I'll be your date. So finally, I was like, Kagiso Lesego Molope never resists a good opportunity to get dressed up. I
And you looked great.
that girl. I'm like, girl, just get dressed up and then go and then have those discussions, at the table and talk to people. And then I went. And I also naively thought these discussions are going to be happening and you're going to be missing out. So I went, but I was sitting on the terrace and I was like, oh my God, this is this is just absolutely abominable. This should not be happening. And then I thought of a few things. And the thing is, I actually, I had the numbers in my head, like how many deaths so far, how many, because I was going to write that email of these are how many
Yeah.
deaths since, like this is how many people have died. This is how much children are starving. This is, where the war is right now. So that's all I had. And then I was like, girl, like you can actually speak to these people directly. If you speak to only the people at your table, what good is that going to do? So I went up
Yeah.
on stage and I said and I was sitting there going, like when we were out on the terrace, I was like, I'm going to say something. I'm going to say something and I'm not telling anybody that I'm going to say it because I think they'll block me or something. So I went up and I only knew that I was going to say the numbers and say the numbers and say,
Yeah.
I hope you enjoy your meal, but this is, there's a famine happening. Like, this is what's happening. And thank you for having me on stage. But, they brought a fight. They're the people who they started a fight with their booing. They
Yeah.
heckled me, they called me a Nazi, and they were just disgusting. Like, they were mean.
Yeah.
And I thought, we're so, this is a room full of power, and that's what you're
Yeah.
doing? And that's when I said, like, we're gonna be asked what we did at this time. Like, this is a question that's coming our way. And this was that's when that came out. I did not have that line like before, but it's always in my head. Like, the world is gonna ask us what we did at this moment in history, because the world is asking Germany what they did in that moment. They're asking people.
Yeah.
I've had Holocaust survivors in my life who were very close to me, who kept saying, where were our neighbors? And what was everybody doing? And I think everybody asks this question about every place, like Rwanda, everybody asks,
Yeah.
what were the neighbors doing? The people who the government was protecting, right? And, post apartheid South Africa, all these white South Africans started saying, oh, we did this and we fought and blah, 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 blah. And I've always had that question in mind, like when this ends, when these events end and we've been part of them, the one question that keeps coming up, I'm surprised partly that my statement was that, I mean, I know it's powerful, but that it was that surprising, because that's all we ever do after these atrocities is ask, where was everybody else? What were they doing? And then I realized, like, my God, these are exactly the people who need this question. But yeah, that was the only part of the speech that was not planned, is me asking, like, what are we gonna do with the power we have?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting that like in a way you had an immediate moment of an answer. I mean, to what the neighbors did, because in that moment you were a person speaking out
Yeah.
and people were either heckling you or silent. Like, was there any solidarity in that room that you sensed, or was it, I think I heard there was a few people who kind of cheered. Is
Yeah.
that correct?
When I at the very end, when I said that part, there were a
Yeah.
couple of people who cheered. But when I got off the stage, one of the people whose book was shortlisted, Astra,
Astra Taylor?
yeah, Astra Taylor, when I
Yeah.
walked off stage, she stood up and she came to me and she like shook my hand like really hard and was like, "Thank you, thank you, thank you so much. Thank you for saying something." And I met her a year later, not a year later, a few months later at we were doing CBC Ideas last year, and she then I can because I was so frazzled. Then
Yeah.
she was like, "I was the person who said," I was like, "Yeah."
Oh.
And then she said, I was gonna say something if my book won, but she was like, but then I didn't get to. So she was the one person who I went back to my table and I started to sit down, and everybody at my table was glaring at me. They were so angry. And and then I was told to get up.
Because you talked about children suffering from malnutrition.
Yeah,
It's so galling
I was
that
ruining
that's
their
how
meal.
you were treated.
Yeah, I was ruining their meal. That's really,
Oh
you
my
know.
God.
Ugh, yeah.
Yeah. And sorry, you were going to say, and then,
Well, and then I was asked to get my things and leave, and I was like, oh, for like a split second, I was like, ooh, am I getting moved from these people because they're angry and being moved to a different table?
Oh my God. Yeah. And no one stepped in to stop that.
Not a single person. Adrian Harewood, who is a friend of mine, he met me outside. It was really kind of a mess. Like, there was so many
Yeah.
people around me. The people, not the guests, but there was him, and he kept asking security, um, who has made this request or this decision, like who is demanding that she leave. And they kept saying, it's private, sir, it's a private matter, it's a private matter. So they wouldn't answer him. Yeah,
Yeah.
but he
Wow.
gave me the most support that night. Yeah.
I'm glad you got some support because I think that that was one of the things that struck me the most beyond just like the badassery of your actions was looking in this room full of like our most powerful people, full of the people who shape our conversations, whether it be through journalism, through art, through politics.
Yeah.
The fact that so many of them were such cowards in
Yeah.
the face of injustice. And
Yeah.
I think that that explains a lot about our world, that and none of it's pretty.
Yeah.
So I'm glad that there were little rays of light in that darkness.
Yeah. I mean, that's what I kept being struck by that when I was leaving. And I think I said to the reporter from the Hill Times, like, I just said that children were starving, and these people are upset with me because I said children were starving. Like, honestly, in my heart, did not understand that that could be a controversial thing to say,
Yeah.
that there is starvation. Like, I didn't. I'm very radical. Okay, so there are things that I could have said. There are
Yeah.
things that I could have said
Good.
about what's actually happening. I could have talked about the
Yep.
Nakba. I could have talked about all kinds of things about
Yep.
how this is not a new thing that's happening to Palestinians. I could have said that, but I didn't. I actually even went to the extent of saying how many Israelis have died. I was like, I said to them,
Yeah.
I'm actually combining the number. I'm telling you how many Israelis and Palestinians are dying, combined.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, it didn't make a difference to them.
And I think that that's sort of one of the hardest parts to swallow, right? And I did want to ask you in light of that. I mean, uh, today in Gaza, it's a year later. The atrocities have just kept piling up. The genocide is just carrying on. Israel has been depriving Gaza of humanitarian aid, which, as I understand it, is a war crime. So, and it's starting to trickle in now as of like the last 24 hours, but barely, and it's not enough. And I guess I just wanted to ask you, if you were standing on that stage again today in front of that group of people who you asked, what will you do effectively? What will you have done with your power? Like, what would you say to that room of politicians, journalists, all of these people, if you had that microphone today?
Today, I would say this is on us. It's on this room. It's on everybody in this room, because we knew what was happening and we had time to stop it, and we didn't. We just kicked back with our friends and did what we generally do. The thing that I asked in May last year was, we need to think about how we hold our power, right? That was the first thing I said. I think it gets sort of cut off in the clip that you get online. I said we need to think about how I said we're some of the most brilliant minds in this country, and that means us gathering in here in one room. Maybe I'll show that at some point. But I said that means us gathering here in one room makes this one of the most powerful rooms in all of Canada. And then I said what you see me saying. We need to think about how we hold our power. And I think I would go, if I had to talk to them today, I would say, this is on us. We participated in this. We were complicit. We didn't act when we had time to act. By the time I was speaking, it was May of 2024. The South Africans had gone to the International Court of Justice, right? Like, that was in January. It was January 11th. I know because it was a day before my birthday.
Oh,
It was January 11th that I stayed up. It was like 2 a.m. my time or something to listen to the entire statement. And one of the things they said was that there is famine in Gaza. They said that on January 11th. By the time I spoke, it was May 7th. Okay? Today, we're talking about just like what, 24 hours, 48 hours ago, we were told, oh, 14,000 babies are at risk of starving in the next 48 hours. Well, okay, but thousands of babies were starving all the way back to when the genocide started. The thing that's happening in North America that I find incredibly frustrating is we're putting out all these statements about who is dying and how many and this, as if it's this like suddenly urgent thing that's happening. But we knew. This is what I want to stress. We knew. It is
yeah.
on us what has happened from October 7th to now. It's on us. We don't get to look around and blame whoever we choose to blame. We don't get to blame Hamas. We don't get to blame Israel. We don't get to blame anybody but ourselves. It's on us. We did this. We don't like to think that we did, but we did this. Everybody in that room was complicit. We did this.
Yeah, you're completely right. It's honestly one of the biggest moral failures of humanity that I've witnessed in my lifetime. And I think we all find ourselves asking ourselves individually, like, I don't know, it feels like you're screaming into the void when you're begging the people with more power to do something.
Yeah.
And in a way, we all have some power.
Yeah.
And it's just, yeah, it's hard. And I was going to save this question for the end, but I might ask you this now because we're on the topic. I think that a lot of people listening to this might ask themselves, right? Like, what am I doing with my power? And you showed us an example of how to use your power in that moment, stepping up on stage and forcing those people to recognize the moment.
Yeah.
What advice do you have for people on how they can use their power and how to recognize the power they have?
Yeah, there's a statement, and I have this like up on my Instagram that says, we like to ask, what would I have done during apartheid? What would I have done during the Holocaust? What would I have done during all these, like hideous, heinous historical event? What would we have done? We like to ask ourselves, what would I have done? The answer is you're doing it now. I think that and I include everybody, all of us, we outside of war zones, we like to look at atrocities and decide that this has nothing to do with us, right? Oh, it's happening in Palestine. Oh, that's so sad. It has nothing to do with me. Or it's happening in another country, whatever. But I think that we need to start thinking of ourselves as architects of our own world. We need to start thinking of ourselves as having a stake, not only having a stake, but being responsible for what is happening. So you can't just sit and talk about it. Everybody has an obligation to do something. Something as simple as, let's say you think, well, I'm not an author, I'm not a journalist, I'm not this, what could I possibly do? Well, we're giving you some information, right? We're telling you who to boycott. We're telling you who's sending arms to, everybody has a different role. Our role as writers and journalists is to tell you what we are seeing, give you the facts, and you can say to yourself, it could be something as very, very simple as, don't put your book up for consideration for a prize whose money is invested in arms in Israel. Like, those things are not huge, but if enough of us do them, then we can say at the end of the day, we did something. That's what I did with my power. I stopped buying at Indigo because I have read about what Indigo's money, what they do with their money, how they support. So think about who's gathering information. If you're not in the business of gathering information, find out what the information is and find out what your part in that can be.
Yeah, that's great advice. Do you think that the answer to your question of what they did with their power, for the people in that room, for those powerful people, do you think they have a better answer today than they did a year ago?
Omar El Akkad has written this book. One day everyone will have always been against this. I think what if I would say that if you were to ask right now, that they would say, we were always opposed. Like we were opposed to this. And sometimes that's as much as people can tell. And that's what we've heard from apartheid, from, the Holocaust survivors. We keep hearing people saying we were against this. And I think if I were to ask the question right now, if I were to say, what did you do? They'd say we were always against this, because people sometimes believe that just saying they were against it, just feeling against it is enough. And it's not. It'll never be. It'll never be enough. So I think that no, they wouldn't say that they did anything, but I think they would say that they were against it. And then they will ask us to feel almost like that was enough.
Yeah. And I think that's where our power comes in, and
Yeah.
not accepting that response, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I'm going to pivot a little bit now because I wanted to talk about something else, because you're kind of the perfect guest this week. Because in addition to the moral courage that you've shown on Gaza, you're also from South Africa, which makes you really well placed to break down another massive story from this week. As I'm sure you're aware, Donald Trump forced South African President Cyril Ramaphosa to sit through a tirade of bullshit about white genocide in South Africa. The first thing I want to ask you, were you shocked to see this misinformation in the Oval Office?
No, because that's all they do is give misinformation. The last time I watched anything about the White House, and I was like, oh my God, I cannot watch this. I remember there was a press conference where someone from the Oval Office, someone, Trump's people said, this was always called the Gulf of America. It was never called the Gulf of Mexico. And so I was like, wow, so that is the level of stupidity and misinformation we're dealing with. So when you've seen something like that, you're not surprised at watching Trump behave the way that he did yesterday. And you have an African president. I don't think that we have ever witnessed an American president treat an African president with any amount of respect.
Yeah. So just before we dive in more, I do want to just give some facts to the audience who might not be super familiar with this baseless conspiracy theory. So I'll just quickly give you guys the facts to debunk this. So from April 1st to April 1st, 2022 to March 31st, 2023, there were 51 murders on farms in South Africa. This is the big thing that these guys are freaking out about, is these farm murders. And they say that it's like white people being targeted. But that is actually, and they use this as evidence of a white genocide. They use that word. But that is a tiny percentage of the total of 27,494 murders in that period, according to numbers from the South African Police Service. The race of these farm victims isn't consistently recorded. So that's according to a fact check from PBS. And the majority of murder victims in South Africa nationwide are poor, under or unemployed, young Black males. This is obviously an incredibly sad thing that these murders are happening at all to anyone, but it's also not a white genocide. Kagiso, you were a teenager in South Africa in the dying days of apartheid. How does it feel? How did you feel seeing these like false and frankly white supremacist claims about your country being said in the Oval Office?
You know, I, to be honest, I don't get worked up about it. I have always known, we have all always known that some lives matter more than others in North America and in other parts of the world. Um, so I know that there's not a genocide. I know that I grew up in a time where the most armed people were the government and farmers, because people who know they've stolen land arm themselves against people whose land they've stolen. That's what they do. There were few people more terrifying than Afrikaner farmers when I was growing up. They would shoot to kill. And so I am not surprised that this is happening right now. I was watching Trump yesterday, and I don't know if anybody really even understood what how horrifying his accusations were, because he kept saying white people. There are white people. You are killing white people, he kept saying. All the time. He never said you were killing South Africans. He never said you were killing. He wasn't even saying you're killing Afrikaners. He kept saying white, 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 right? This is a government who is arming the Israeli army and having them, watching them, and encouraging them really to destroy, anything and everything that is Palestine, um, ethnically cleanse. And all he kept saying about South Africa was white people. The president of South Africa, Cyril Ramaphosa, actually told him, there is criminality in the country. There are lots of people who are being killed. There's this and this happening. But he didn't care. He just kept saying there's white people. And I think, to me, that was really the central message of that it was not a discussion of that encounter in the Oval Office. Was they were saying what it was like, white lives matter, white lives matter,
Yeah.
white lives
And
matter.
white lives matter more is what he was saying too, which is
Yeah.
so it's vile to see that level of white supremacy on display, like
Yeah.
in those halls of power. I mean, maybe it's a bit honest for once, but it's disturbing. It's really disturbing.
It's the level of white supremacy I grew up with. So to
Yeah.
me, it's very, very much like you're watching two of the same people come together. That's what that meeting looked like to me. Was you know what that's what this whole genocide in South Africa thing has been. It's just they're bros. They're supporting each other. This is, if you look at the history of settler colonialism in the entire world, you can literally draw the connections. You can see what Canada did for apartheid South Africa. You can see what America did for apartheid South Africa. You can see what apartheid South Africa did for Israel, what Israel did for. So I never look at this and be shocked, because there is settler colonialism happening all over the world, and they will at all times support each other because it's the same project, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Something that really struck me, I was reading Ta-Nehisi Coates' The Message last week, and I'm not overly familiar with South African history, so I wasn't aware of this politician and former prime minister now, Vorster,
Yeah.
who I'm not telling you anything probably that you don't already know, but for the audience's sake, yeah, it just blew my mind. And it's such a pure expression of how colonialism and support for colonialism trumps all, right? Because Vorster wanted South Africa to intervene during World War II on the side of Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And then he became prime minister later and was invited to Israel
Well,
to go to the Jerusalem site
yeah.
for Holocaust Memorial. And I just think that is so egregious that their mutual support for colonialism was more important than the fact
Oh, yeah.
that this dude was clearly an anti-Semite.
Yeah.
Like, it's horrifying. So
But you
I don't
read
know.
what he
Yeah.
said. right? You read what he
Yeah.
said when he was in Jerusalem, right? About how Israel and South Africa have the same problem, about how Israel and South Africa are surrounded by dark people, right? And they're in danger, they in equal or similar danger.
Wow.
And this is the thing is this is what the fear is. These are the origins of the South African army being called like the defense force, right? The South African Defense Force, and then you have the Israeli Defense Force. It's all rooted in deep racism and in land theft. They know they've stolen land. As I said in the beginning, they know they've stolen land, so they need to constantly be defending the land against the people of the land.
Yeah. I'm curious about how these racist, baseless conspiracies being spouted in the Oval Office will reverberate, like these lies will reverberate in South Africa. Like, how are these claims going to impact communities there?
So I think what is going to impact communities is America withdrawing aid from South Africa. I think that is
Yes.
going to impact. Generally, no South African would even for a second be worried about what's happening, what Trump said. I mean, it was a joke. We're all joking about it yesterday with my family, with friends. Like, this is so silly, really.
Yeah.
It's silly. It's not even like it's not, we don't feel like it's so horrifying at this point. We're just like, we know they have land. They know that they're not being killed in large numbers. And they also know, and they are not saying this to the world because they know if they said this to the world would turn around and be like, wait, hold on. So what do you mean genocide? They're not saying to the world that they have their own town. They have a town that is a whites only town that is protected by them, that is an armed town. It's an Afrikaner town called Orania in South Africa. Okay, so let's talk about how you're all getting killed when you have a whites only town. Where else in the world is there a whites only town that the government, I mean, I think we always say, like, why is the government putting up with this? How can they have their own town? But they have their own town because they cannot live amongst us, and they have their own town mainly, and you will see if you look at videos, they say it's to protect Africana culture.
Hmm.
So I mean, I don't know if this answers your question, but we're not concerned about being seen as, killers, because that's always the
Yeah.
story that we're killers. So this is nothing new, you know.
Yeah, and I guess it's a really good point that you made about the very real impact of the U.S. aid cuts. I mean, I know that's something, the impact of AIDS is something that you've felt. You've lost friends, and I understand it's something you've worked through in some of your writing. And I guess maybe that is the more important question that I didn't write down here today, because I wanted to talk about this conversation in the Oval Office. But really, it seems like other actions from the Trump administration are far more impactful on South Africans. I don't know if you want to speak to that a little bit.
Far more impactful, far more
Yeah.
impactful. Medication for HIV, we're not going to have money for that because the Trump administration has done so much to, withdraw aid. And I think really one thing that I can say about what was happening in the Oval Office was that President Ramaphosa was saying, I mean, I think he showed up at all because he knows how devastating removal of aid is going to be, or is on communities in South Africa. He was trying to reason with Trump, not because he was there to defend the claims that there's a genocide. He was there because he wanted Trump to talk about withdrawing aid. He kept saying, he said there, I think it was just so like dehumanizing the way he was being treated, right?
Yeah.
But I feel like what I really want to stress is that the man, President Ramaphosa, was calm and measured, not only because he's a calm and measured leader, but because he knows what's at stake if he completely, or if the relationship between South Africa and United States continues to deteriorate. So he wasn't there to argue about Africana genocide. He was there to basically plead with America to keep aid because it is going to devastate a very large, very large percentage of the community.
Yeah. There's something that's just, it really puts it into perspective how egregious Trump's behavior really was when you consider the fact that, like, the president was only there to try to mitigate harm, and he was put through this
Yeah,
humiliating
yeah,
mistreatment. And
yeah,
that's just, it's so depraved.
yeah,
It's really awful.
yeah.
Is there anything that you want people to know about South Africa, given all the lies that are circulating right now? I kind of want to give you the opportunity. I'm sure that there's probably a million different things going through your mind right now, but is there anything specifically that you want people to understand about your country, about your hometown?
Yeah, so South Africa has been out of apartheid since 1994, the first democratic elections. Um, Apartheid was sworn into law in 1948, which is the same year that Israel was born, not a coincidence.
Yeah, the Nakba. Yeah.
Yeah. So what has happened? What happened during apartheid and what is still happening is that we're what, like 80%, like 20% of the population, what the white population owned 80% of the land. Um, if you think about all the issues that come with land, all the ways in which South Africa has been devastated by apartheid, you understand that there is no way that when the democratic elections happened, that any kind of justice was done in terms of land. We still mostly don't own land. What has also happened is that the post-apartheid generation, moved from idolizing our leaders to questioning what exactly they had done during the transition from apartheid to freedom, to democracy. What did you do so that our future can be ensured? What did you do so that we can, be safe and have food? And, what did you do for our livelihood? And one of the biggest things that has happened is that, well, what came out of that, all of that questioning is the land back movement, there's a land back movement here, there's a land back movement in all settler colonial states, right? What is happening with Afrikaners, these laws that Trump was saying last night, he really abhors the equality laws, right? So he said something to President Ramaphosa about that. What are these laws? And these laws need to change. What he's saying is you need to prevent the possibility that Black people are ever going to own land. You need to keep the land in the hands of the white people. This has been the biggest struggle, is that we don't have land. We had our land stolen. We don't have land, and when you don't have land, you don't really have much of much protection in your own country. So this is what the whole Africana, you know, genocide thing is fueled by. It's fueled by knowing that the land needs to be returned to people. The land needs to be redistributed. You get someone like Elon Musk who says that there's a genocide. What Elon Musk understands is that his family probably still has a stake in where the land goes in South Africa. He knows that if Black people actually do get what they're asking for, then a lot of white people are going to be very, very, very unhappy, and they imagine disadvantaged, and that's just not true. So
Yeah.
anytime you hear, and the other thing that's happened in South Africa is a lot of white people are insisting, and there's a whole movement where they want to be called African. And we need to understand, what I would like the world to understand is that whenever people are talking about um, white people being called African, or white people being killed, or all that is a response to the land back movement.
Mm.
So I think that that needs to be at the top of everybody's head. Like, you need to ask, well, what is happening with land? Why are apartheid laws still, supporting the white population, which is only like 20% of the population? Why are all those still working for them? And yeah, why do they have a town? They have land. That's what they have. And this is all in response to us saying we want the land back.
It's a really helpful framework for understanding the issues coming out of South Africa, particularly for those of us who don't have a huge understanding of the internal politics. So it's really helpful to have that baseline to root it back in, that it's a resistance to returning land at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, I think that one thing I'm really valuing in this conversation is, because you're a writer, you do a really good job of just like taking ideas and just like wording them in ways that are you're a communicator, like you're wording things in a way that like just makes sense, right? And one thing that you said of writing is, and I'm going to quote you here, so I'm sorry if I'm making you shy, but you said of writing that, quote, "You carry stories inside for so long, it's very important to get them out. It's a big release." And I wanted to, just before we wrap things up, ask you about that, because the world feels like it's getting crueler these days. And I think that makes telling these stories that we carry more important than ever. What is the role and responsibility of writers and the people consuming writing in this time that we're living through?
I think we need to be fully engaged with what's happening in our world. I think that's always the case for all artists and journalists. We need to be um, informing, right? We need to always be informing. But I think for storytellers specifically, we need to be recording what's happening. Because storytelling is a way of recording what the world is experiencing in your time. But I also think that storytelling is a map. So we need to be drawing a map um, of where we come from, where we are, and where we're potentially going, so that future generations can then trace back the roots of what the world has been. And we need to always, I became very interested in maps, if even when I was a child, but maps really tell us what our world is and what it looks like. And you get to, when you read maps, to know who does and doesn't get to be written on a map, right? Like, there are, you get the city of Ottawa, for example, you get the city of, Vancouver or whatever, but you don't get the res, right? Like, you don't know where the Indigenous people live. That's not on the Canadian map. And I think the role of the storyteller is to give a full picture of the map. And you get to say, yes, there was a genocide, but you also have to say, and then there were these powerful people who didn't do anything about it. And then, give a full picture of the map, instead of, you know, because people are in danger of being erased off maps. And I think so. I think that's the role of storytelling at this point.
Yeah, that's very good advice too. For, I think, anyone reading those stories should make sure that they're also prioritizing ensuring that the stories that they're informing themselves with provide a fuller picture of that map, right?
Yeah.
So, Kagiso, I think that's basically everything I wanted to ask you. You've been so generous with your time. But before I wrap things up, is there anything that you wanted to say about the topics that we touched on today, or anything else that you didn't get the chance to say through the questions? I just wanted to kind of give you the floor. If there's nothing, that's fine too. But just if there's anything you wanted to say, I just want to give you the floor.
I think I really want, just for my part and what happened at Politics in the Pen, I think what I really would like people to take away from that is that our voices are just as powerful as the people we put in power. And people have to stop saying that, weren't you scared? Asking, weren't you scared? It's too late for us to be scared. We have already wasted a lot of time. What we should be really, really afraid of is these atrocities, these human rights violations continuing. What I think I would say is shift your fear, like shift the source of your fear. You can be afraid of more children dying and starving to death, or you can be afraid of your politicians. It's shift your fear. Decide decide what you're going to be more afraid of.
Yeah. Shift your fear. You keep having these little one-liners that I just sit with them. And anyways, it's been such a great conversation, Kagiso. Thank you so much for sharing your knowledge and taking this time. I'm sure that people after listening to you will want to keep up with you. So would you mind letting them know where they can find you on social media, or what they can read from you, even if there's anything you want to promote? Just, you have the floor.
Thank you so much, Rachel.
Of course.
I really had such a great conversation with you.
Oh, good.
And, thoughtful questions lead to thoughtful answers, I think. So
that's really kind. Thank you.
I really appreciate it. So all my books can be found in all bookstores. And if you don't find the book, and because they're usually is lower stock, so if you don't find a book, just ask your local bookseller. Not Indigo.
Yeah.
your local independent bookstore. Please ask them to order the books if you don't have them. And look out for my next novel, which is coming out on my birthday.
And that's January, right?
January.
Yeah.
It's called We Inherit the Fire. And it's about a woman who is a former political prisoner in apartheid South Africa, and being a mother and struggling with motherhood as a former prisoner. And her child is growing up in a time when apartheid is ending. So it's like her child is growing up at a time when the things that she fought for are now being realized.
Oh, that sounds fantastic. And are you on any socials that you want people to be able to follow you on? Or
Yeah, I'm really only on Instagram. So it's Kagiso-san. It's at Kagiso-san. So Kagisosan. Yeah.
Perfect. And I will have that in the show notes for you guys too, so you can find all the links and everything. Kagiso, thank you again. This was a total pleasure. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you, Rachel.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Bubble Pop. I'm Rachel Gilmore, your least favorite person's least favorite journalist. If you enjoyed this episode, consider subscribing to Bubble Pop on YouTube, Patreon, Substack, or wherever you like to listen. You can also find me on TikTok, Instagram, Twitch, and Blue Sky. I'd like to say a special thank you to Hans Vivian Wenzel for making the incredibly groovy music for Bubble Pop. You can find more of his stuff on Spotify under the artist name Hans. That's a lowercase h with an exclamation mark. Thanks again for spending this time with me. I know I say this every week, so you guys are probably sick of it by now, but I need to thank you every time, because this is literally my dream job and you make it possible. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.